Hey, welcome to a solo edition of BGO Blind Pig, the official podcast of BGObsession.com, home to your burgundy and gold obsession since 2009. The absolute best fan forum for Washington football fans anywhere. Come join us. Well, we would love to have you. We also have a big presence on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Come find us, BGObsession.com. So this particular edition of BGO Blind Pig is called Opposing Delicacies. That's where we go out, we look at our road opponents, and even though we can't stand our road opponents, we despise them, but we love food, and we want to know what dishes are iconic in the places that we travel to play football. So let's talk about Philly. We're done with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Don't be down, Washington fans. We lost that game because we did not perform, not because of the Pittsburgh team, and we will be back. So proud of this team so far in 2024. So we should not be down at all heading into week 11 into Philadelphia. But let's talk about Philadelphia iconic foods. I know many Philadelphia fans are going to say to me, what about a cheesesteak? Cheesesteak, eh. Well, you know what? Cheesesteak is like shaved beef and Cheese Whiz. So we're not going to talk about cheesesteak, mostly because I know you want me to. So therefore, F you, Philadelphia fans. I don't want to talk about cheesesteaks. We're going to talk about a couple of Philadelphia iconic foods that have a little bit more history. The first one is Philadelphia tomato pie, and the second one is something called scrapple. So let's start with Philadelphia tomato pie. Philadelphia tomato pie is kind of a pizza-like, not pizza, but it's pizza-like. And it's a dish that started way back in 1910 with the famous brick oven bakery of Iannelli's. And Iannelli's apparently had an issue where they made too much hoagie dough. And so they decided, what can we do with all this dough? And they came up with tomato pie. And it was so successful that it soon became a Philadelphia staple all over Philadelphia. Philadelphians have a lot of names for tomato pie, including tomato pie, but they also call it gravy pie, church pie, red pizza, granny pie, or red pie, or that effing pie. Anyway, you know I'm going to make fun of you, Philadelphia fans. Philadelphia pie, tomato pie from Philadelphia is a pretty simple dish, but it really is a very nice thing. If you want to try it, it's not particularly complicated. Neither of the foods we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about scrapple as well. Scrapple is kind of the same dish that every colony and every early state came up with on their own. In North Carolina, we call it like liver mush or liver pudding. Some states call it souse. But basically, scrapple is made up from leftover parts of the pig that cannot be used otherwise. And it's a form of sausage. But if you're not from Pennsylvania, you may not be familiar with scrapple, which is a kind of a Pennsylvania Dutch creation. But it's just a way to use parts of the animal that would not otherwise be usable. And it's delicious. I suggest you just think of it as sausage. But we're going to talk about Philadelphia tomato pie and scrapple. We're going to show you from someone that's never had them and never made them how the hell to make them. And I hope I do it justice. So let's start out with Philadelphia tomato pie.
All right, we are making our tomato pie dough, and in the interest of integrity, this is pizza dough that I made a couple weeks ago and froze, and then I'm kind of waking it back up. I added a little bit more yeast to the mix, kneaded it, and now I've got it sitting on top of my oven, which I've got on low heat just to provide a little bit of warmth. And I put a generous amount of olive oil on it. And Philadelphia tomato pie crust is, first of all, it's going to be very thick, and it's almost like focaccia, if you've ever made focaccia. But I'm cheating with some homemade pizza dough, and it'll work out just fine. I'm just going to put it on a little bit thicker than I would. I kind of like pizza crust thin. typically, but in this case, we want at least an inch of crust on our Philadelphia tomato pie. So I'm going to cover this back up again, and we'll let it rise for an hour or so, and then we'll move on.
So you could, of course, make your tomato pie crust from scratch. It's certainly not difficult. I mean, basically, most pizza doughs are flour, water, a little bit of salt, maybe a little bit of sugar, and yeast. It's not rocket science. It's more what you do with those ingredients as you're mixing them and preparing the dough. But I think any kind of quality pizza dough would work with this recipe. You just want to remember the crust needs to be thick. It's a thick crust, not a thin crust by any stretch of the imagination. So let's talk more about how to make the crust and how to make this get our tomato pie going here.
Based on the recipes that I looked at, does not use like store-bought tomato sauce, although I'm sure you could. But in this case, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a very simple. This is not our sauce. We're going to be working with the tomatoes once we grind them up. But I'm going to go ahead and put just basic whole tomatoes. I'm using a little more than 3 small cans, or you could use a large 28-ounce can of tomatoes. And I may not do them all at once here, but you get the general idea. I'm putting them in my food processor. You could use a blender as well. And then we will go ahead and puree these, just kind of a rough puree. And I'm going to let that run for a while until it's well pureed. And then we'll use this to finish our sauce.
So again, we're just pureeing canned tomatoes. I could have just said that and saved you like 2 minutes, but that's what we're doing there. And very simple. You don't want to overthink the sauce here, but let's talk about the rest of the sauce components.
All right, so the next step in making our Philadelphia tomato pie is we're gonna assemble the sauce. The first thing I did is I took 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter, melted that down, and I am going to add to that several things. The first being 4 cloves of garlic that I've minced up. It is not easy doing all of this with one hand. I need a opposing delicacy assistant to help hold the camera, etc. But anyway. All right, so we've added 4 cloves of garlic to our butter and olive oil mix. And also 2 tablespoons of dried oregano. And I will confess I deviated from the recipe a little bit, and I added about half a teaspoon of basil because, you know, I can. So I'm going to add that into the mix here. And then the next thing we're going to do is we'll saute that a little bit. At least get it mixed up a little bit. And we're going to saute this just for a couple of minutes. And then the next thing we'll do, once we've got that, the garlic basically cooked a little bit, browned through, we're going to add our pureed tomatoes. Again, that's a little more than 28 ounces. I wanted to make sure I had plenty of sauce because since we're not going to be putting a ton of cheese on the tomato pie, we want lots of sauce. That's kind of the whole key to it. And then we're going to add a tablespoon or so of sugar. And then the last thing we're going to do once our garlic is browned is we're going to add 2 shallots that I've peeled and cut in half. We're not going to have those shallots in the sauce. We just want the flavor of the shallots to kind of cook in. So again, we've got our garlic, we've got our red pepper flakes, oregano, a little bit of basil because I like basil. We've got our pureed tomato. We're going to add a tablespoon of sugar, and we're going to put a couple of cut up shallots into the mix to add some flavor and some aromatics. So that's what we got for our sauce. We'll come back and check it out about 45 minutes from now.
So again, we've got our sauce going here. Very simple, not a lot of ingredients. You just want to assemble it, and then you're going to want to give it a good 45 minutes at least, simmering at kind of medium temperature to evaporate some of that fluid, because you don't want a lot of liquid in your sauce going on to the tomato pie. So let's look a little bit closer at the sauce here.
So we've got our sauce assembled, and we are simmering away. We're going to try to thicken that sauce up some, probably about 45 minutes. And I've got it on medium. I'll probably turn it down so I don't burn anything. But we want it to simmer, and about 45 minutes from now, it should be nice and thick.
So in the meantime, I've gone ahead and pulled out my dough. I will tell you it was a little bit of a challenge. I couldn't figure out whether to put it on a round, kind of a pizza dish, or a square, more traditional in Philadelphia style, a square plate. And I finally settled on a glass square, kind of a broiler pan. And that worked out well for me. But let's look at how we set up our dough and add our sauce and get it ready to go in the oven.
All right, well, we've got our sauce, and we're going to start assembling our pie here. And this dough is so elastic, I'm having a little bit of trouble keeping it spread out, but we're going to make the best of what we got here. You can see that I've got really thick sauce here. It really thickened up over that 45-minute simmering. And because we're not going to have a lot of cheese on this, we want plenty of sauce, because that's kind of the bulk of the whole thing, is the sauce. And again, pretty simple sauce. I've got the oven set at bake for 450 degrees, and we're probably going to go something like 20 minutes. That may not be enough, but that'll be our starting point, and then we'll kind of check it. So, and again, this is a very thick crust.
So it did take a little longer than 20 minutes, at least 30 minutes. I just kept checking it. I think you're safe to throw it in the oven at 450, let it go for 20 minutes, and then check it every 5 minutes after that. The one thing that's nice about using glass cookware is I didn't have to worry about burning the crust, which I might have done if it was on foil, a steel pan or something else. But in the glass broiler tray, I didn't have to worry about that. So let's look at the finished product coming out of the oven and see how it looks.
Okay, we've had our tomato pie in the oven. I ended up baking it at 450. I said I start at 20 minutes. It actually took 30 minutes. 30 minutes was perfect. You can kind of see that is like a good inch of crust, and that's what you want with tomato pie. And again, very simple, basically just a tomato sauce on top. And one thing that makes tomato pie a little bit different is you do not add cheese until it has cooled. So I won't say it's exactly room temperature, but it is close to room temperature. So I'm gonna add some cheese in a minute, and then we're gonna give this a taste test and see what we think. But this is BGO Blind Pig, which Blind Pig is actually a slang term for a speakeasy. So you may notice when we do our Blind Pig podcast that we frequently are imbibing in some form of alcohol. A lot of us love beer, a lot of us love bourbon or whiskey, but I just wanted to say today I am day drinking as I do this podcast. I'm having a Brooklyn Brewery limited edition Black Ops Stout, and what makes this special is they aged this stout in Four Roses small batch barrels. So man, it is good. I actually made another recipe this weekend called pepper stout beef, which is kind of a shredded shredded beef sandwich with this black ops as the basis for it. So anyway, I am not hurting today. I'm having some fun. But let's go ahead and we're gonna add some cheese to our tomato pie, our Philadelphia tomato pie. This is mostly Parmesan, a little bit of Romano, and we're not gonna go crazy with it. We're just gonna add a sprinkling of it, a good sprinkling, and you wanna do this after it has cooled. It's not one of those things where you're melting cheese on it like you would with a pizza. And we just want a generous coating on there. The star of this pie is the sauce and the crust. That's probably more than I needed to add, to be honest. I did add a little bit of salt, which I could have done in the sauce, but just a sprinkling of salt before I added the cheese. So we are going to do a taste test in just a moment.
So I hate to be a tease, but I'm going to hold off on the taste test. We'll do that for both the tomato pie and scrapple at the end of the podcast. But let's talk about the other traditional Philly food, which is scrapple. And scrapple, as I mentioned before, a lot of versions of scrapple across the United States. Here in North Carolina, we call it liver mush or liver pudding. There's another product called souse, S-O-U-S-E. I don't know the origins of that, but that's another version, very similar to scrapple and those North Carolina relatives. Apparently, scrapple, but it's a Pennsylvania Dutch product. It came to the U.S. via the Pennsylvania Dutch, but it came from Germany from a meat pudding called panis, which was made with buckwheat and lots of pork scraps and seasonings. And of course, in the United States, we're not big buckwheat fans, unless you're talking about the Little Rascals, which is a whole other conversation. So we substituted cornmeal for that. So scrapple is a Pennsylvania Dutch product. It's all of the original states know what scrapple was, whether it's Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, Northern Virginia. A lot of folks that originated in those areas are huge scrapple people. So it's basically a sausage, and that's probably the most palatable way to think of it. Don't think too much, people. It's sausage. So let's talk about how to make scrapple.
So obviously scrapple is not a particularly complicated dish to make, but if you're not familiar with it, you still have to figure it out, right? So I've got my scrapple cut into slices, probably like 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit thicker than that in some cases. And I'm simply gonna drop it into my oil. Now, I'm using olive oil. You could use any oil. I'm gonna turn the heat up just a little bit. And the big thing with scrapple is it wants to crumble. So you want to be gentle with it. You don't want to be turning it a lot. So we're gonna basically fry this. And again, I'm using olive oil. We're gonna basically fry it in olive oil for a couple of minutes until I feel like it's crispy on the other side, and then we'll flip it once. We're not gonna flip it multiple times because that's a recipe for disaster in terms of it crumbling up. And that is a whole batch of scrapple right there. So we're just gonna crank the heat up a little bit on this. I'm gonna fry it in my oil for about 2 to 3 minutes until I feel like it's crispy on the other side. And then we'll turn it once, fry it for another couple minutes, and then it's ready to go.
I got to confess to you, watching myself fry that scrapple, I started having like a Pavlov dog thing going on where I started salivating it. It's pretty good. You could also bake your scrapple, which to me that's crazy because it's like you're eating pork products of unknown origin. But if you want your pork products of unknown origin in a more healthy way, you could bake your scrapple. I'm sorry, but sometimes I wonder about the logic behind certain things, but you can bake it. I think frying it is the way to go. So anyway, let's take a look at how our scrapple's doing. So I've probably been going here about 3 minutes, maybe a little bit more. One thing about frying anything, as most cooks know, is I probably overloaded the pan. I probably should have done like 4 at a time, because anytime you drop food into the hot oil, it's going to drop the temperature. So it took a little while to get going since I put the entire block of scrapple in at one time. So that's just one thing you might want to do differently. But I'm going to go ahead and try to turn these without tearing them all to hell. We'll see how I do. I kind of botched that one. Not too terribly. They're definitely browned on the other side. That one was a little better. And I'll continue turning these off camera. We'll get them going another 3 minutes per side. All right, let's finish up our scrapple here and see how it turns out. So you can see some of my turning attempts worked out perfectly. Some of them broke apart a little bit. The bottom line is it doesn't matter. It's scrapple. I mean, the name scrapple sounds like it's, you know, something that's chunked up and would mix well with scrambled eggs or something. So I'm not going to obsess about that, but that is a challenge with scrapple, is keeping it together. So that argues do a few pieces at a time, and that way it's easier to manage. You got more room to work with versus having a full pan. But anyway, we're going to let this go for another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will pull it off, and we're going to do our taste test. So we started out talking about Philadelphia tomato pie, and I left you hanging, man. I left you hanging, wondering how did that pie come out. So let's see our Philadelphia tomato pie taste test. All right, here comes a moment of truth. This is my very first attempt at Philadelphia tomato pie. I despise Philadelphia. However, I respect I respect your traditions. One of the early American cities, one of the most important American cities, and I love their food traditions. So we're going to give this a taste. And so pardon me while I move the camera away while I take a big bite. Oh my God, that's good. So just lots of great fluffy pizza dough kind of flavor to it. Really, you get the best parts of any pizza. And again, I'm not saying this is pizza because it's something a little bit different from pizza, but really all you taste is that tomato and that great crust and that Parmesan Romano cheese on top. It doesn't need a damn thing additional. I can see why this is like a amazing comfort food in Philadelphia, and you can find it all over Philadelphia, all different, many different varieties and versions. So I would say that Philadelphia tomato pie is definitely something that you should try and make, and it's not difficult, and I'm a big fan. So Commanders fans, if you're going up to Philadelphia on Thursday night to overwhelm that stadium and dominate our opponent in the stands, make sure you try some Philadelphia tomato pie. Definitely really good. So let's finish up. Let's wrap up with our scrapple taste test. So here we have it, our cooked scrapple. Again, it really wasn't difficult. You do have to be careful when you're turning it. You don't want to be trying to flip it over and over again. Put it in the oil, let it cook until you're very confident it's well browned on the other side, and then take a sharp spatula and flip it, and then do the same thing. Leave it, make sure you're satisfied that it's well cooked on the other side, and then pull it off. And you're still probably gonna, as you can see, you're probably gonna tear some up in the process, but for my first attempt, I'm pretty happy. I am going to be adding kind of the traditional addition, which is maple syrup. a dear friend of mine, Donovan Smith, who I work with, awesome lady. She goes up to Maine every year and helps out with her church, harvesting maple syrup. So this is actually maple syrup that was collected from a tap tree by my friend, and I'm going to use that as a very special ingredient. And we're just going to drizzle some maple syrup on this stuff. All right, maybe we're going to pour some maple syrup on this stuff, and then we're going to give it a taste. This is my first Scrapple experience. And I hope I don't burn the ever-loving hell out of my mouth while I do it. All right, here we go. And that is right up my alley, man. I mean, obviously the first thing you get is the maple syrup, the sweetness of the maple syrup, and then you get that crispiness of all that pork. I mean, it's basically a sausage, right? That crispiness and a little bit of softness inside. It's not totally crispy all the way through. If you imagine if you wanted to slice it thinner, you could make it crispy all the way through. But it's well cooked. I mean, it just tastes awesome. Just basically sausage with maple syrup on it, and you're gonna dig it if you try Scrapple. Don't be turned off by the ingredients. So I gotta say, I've done a lot of these opposing delicacy videos, and I don't want to diss Rocky Mountain oysters or anything, but tomato pie and Scrapple, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that doesn't taste those items and say, damn, that's pretty good. So I encourage you, be adventurous in your football fandom and be adventurous with your food choices. And please give these two dishes a try. Please don't at me with your opinion about how authentic my attempt was. I don't claim to be from Philadelphia. I don't want to be from Philadelphia. With apologies to Arlene Zip and Mike Jaconis, two of my dear friends from there. But I do think I took a pretty good crack at a couple of foods that made Philadelphia famous. So until next time, come check out bgobsession.com, the best fan forum for Washington football fans anywhere on the web since 2009, home to your Burgundy and Gold obsession. Check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and we would love to have you join our forum at bgobsession.com. Until next time, we'll talk about kicking Philadelphia's ass on the next one.